Hey guys, my name is Francisco Hernandez, and today I'm going to be doing an editing video for everyone because it's something that I've been wanting to do for a while. I haven't made an editing video in forever, and it's something that you guys have been questioning for a while now as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do an editing video, but it's going to be over a photo that was taken with just natural flash with natural light. So it's going to be a little bit different than my usual edit. Usually with natural light, I do have to do a lot more editing to get a result that I like, and with off-camera flash, it's more of like me just adding to the image. So I'm gonna go ahead and start now so that we can just get over everything that we need to cover today without making it too long of a video. One thing I do want to state before I start is that my editing workflow is not the absolute best in terms of getting the best quality out of your image. So I do want to state that because I am going to be exporting the JPEG. I'm going to be processing the raw file in Lightroom, then exporting that as a JPEG, and then working off of the JPEG in Photoshop. So I just wanted to state that there are other ways to get better quality out of the images, but for what I do, which is produce a lot of stuff for social media, it's perfectly fine. So I'm gonna go ahead and start now so you can see the edit. Okay, so one thing I do all the time whenever I edit a photo, regardless if it's natural light or flash, is I always bump up the colors with this blue primary slider, saturation slider on the bottom under the calibration area in Lightroom. So I'm gonna go ahead and bump it up. Usually I do somewhere between 40 to 60. I'm gonna go to 60. What you're gonna see is that all the colors are bumped up a bit, but usually what happens is the oranges get bumped up a bit as well. And for people who have, or for people who are not just pale, in other words, the skin color is gonna get pushed a little bit too much. So I usually take that down. I will do that in a second, but I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of get everything as I scroll up. So another thing I always do is enable the profile corrections. And right now I did see that I have the Sony A5 FE 1.8, so I made some corrections in terms of vignetting and distortion. I actually do like the vignetting when it comes to just any lens that I use. I don't think I've ever experienced one that was too heavy unless it was a very wide lens. So I'm gonna go ahead and just take the vignetting off. And then I'm gonna go up to sharpening. I always sharpen the photos up to about 60. It really makes the photos really nice and sharp. And now I'm going to go ahead and just reduce that saturation with the hue, saturation, luminance area of Lightroom. And I'm going to go ahead and do what I just told you guys earlier, which was reduce those oranges because it's a little too much on Marina's skin. So I'm going to go ahead and go to -10. Usually -10 is an area where it's going to be fine, but -15, sometimes I do have to go to that area, to that level. Another thing I like to do in the hue, saturation, luminance area is go to the hues and see if there's anything in the image that I can kind of change and alter to make the image more whole together. What I mean by that is in this image, what you're seeing right now, there's a lot of different colors everywhere, but the main things that stick out are those blues on the car behind her, the cars behind her, and maybe the greens in the grass. So one thing I can adjust without making the image too crazy is maybe those greens, I can make them more of a orangish hue. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the hue area. What I like to do whenever I'm adjusting something is I like to go to the far left and far right if there's a slider available. So I'm going to go to the far right. See how that looks like? There's like mintier greens. Go to the far left and there's a lot more of a orangish tones. I feel like it's a lot more warm, in other words. So I'm going to go ahead and not go all the way to the far left and keep it at -100, but maybe something like -40 or -50. I'm gonna keep it there, and I'm gonna go ahead and just put it back to 0 so you guys can see real quick how it looked like. It's very subtle. It's honestly very, very subtle, but it's there. Maybe I'll go to -60. Sometimes, even though I bumped up the colors a bit, I will still bump up the vibrance up to like maybe 20. So I'm gonna do that right now. And I feel like the white balance is perfect at 6100. It's nice and warm. If I wanted to adjust it, then I could just go ahead and do so, but I like the warmth of the image, specifically with those orange tones behind her. So I'm gonna go ahead and just leave it as is right now. Maybe one thing I will do is just lower the highlights. Okay, no, never mind. So usually when I edit, sometimes I'll have an idea and it will work, but just not as an effect that I'm gonna be applying to the entire image. So I do wanna reduce the highlights, but not on the entire image. Usually when I edit a photo that's natural light and there's shadow on the subject, when I reduce the highlights, it just feels like I'm making them a lot more dull. So I'm gonna go ahead and get the adjustment brush. I hit K on the keyboard, it's a shortcut. And if you guys are not familiar with the adjustment brush in Lightroom, it's basically a paintbrush that you can paint onto the image. And all the things that you're seeing on the right here, the exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, all that stuff on the side is what you're gonna be able to adjust selectively. So I'm gonna go ahead and just go to like the highlights, because I do wanna reduce the highlights on the top there. Let's see how that looks like when I paint it on to -50. Okay, so yeah, I can see that I did a good job in reducing those highlights without looking too bad. So let me show you a bad example. I'm gonna go to -100, and you can see it just looks bad. It looks like there's a little bit of black on that highlight. So I'm gonna go ahead and keep it at -50, because I'm reducing it without looking too much. And now, what I'm gonna do is maybe I can try to desaturate those blues on the cars behind her. So I'm gonna go to saturation, and this is something I'm gonna be changing the saturation of. It's already at -50, but you can go ahead and just adjust it. Okay, I do like it like that, desaturated, so I'm gonna keep it there. One important thing that I do when it comes to editing this shot is, since she's underexposed, because there's no flash, it's natural light, and I do like the background exposure as it is right now, is I need to add selectively add exposure to her. So that's what I'm gonna do with this adjustment brush. I'm gonna hit K, go to this effect here, go to exposure, and right now I have it at a high level of exposure, +3 exposure. But I do this for a reason. So I'm gonna go ahead and just start to apply it. But before I start to apply it, what I forgot to mention is that when it comes to adding this effect using the adjustment brush, you can either have it at a very high feather, so it's kind of just softening the effect around the edges. That's why you see a circle. Hopefully you guys see it on the screen. There's a circle, and then there's a circle around that circle, and that's how much the fall off is. And you can also adjust the flow and the density of that effect being applied. I have it at 65 on flow and density because that's just a good level for me right now. But yeah, let me go ahead and just apply this brightness onto her, and you're gonna see a very big difference. I usually have it at this brightness to start with to see exactly the exposure changes that are being made, and then I reduce it. So just keep that in mind right now while I paint this effect on. Okay, so I just painted all the exposure on her. I feel like it's a good level where it's not coming out to the background, because you don't want that. You don't want it to ever, the effect that you're applying onto the subject only, to spill out into the background. But sometimes I do this intentionally, but at a lower opacity. Like what I'm gonna do right now is the brightness is on her only, but I'm gonna just paint just a little bit off the edges onto the background. You never wanna do this very heavily. You always want it to just be very subtle. So right now, what I'm just painting on right now is very subtle, or I'm trying my best to make it very subtle. And okay, so I have it at a very subtle level right now. And again, what you're seeing is on Marina is she's way too bright. So I'm gonna go ahead and just reduce that effect now by just sliding that slider, the exposure slider. Okay, that's a little too much. I feel like at, let's see, 1.8. I feel like this level 1.8 is good. What my goal is in Lightroom is to get it to a level where it's not too standing, it doesn't stand out too much. I feel like she is just a little bit, but it's fine. And then in Photoshop, what I'm gonna do is just alter the exposures a bit more. So right now at the level that it's at, it's fine. So I'm gonna go ahead and just back out. One thing I also do whenever I edit a photo is bring out the eyes a little bit. Because there's a flare creeping into the shot, I already know that when I adjusted the exposure, it was applying it a little too heavily, like that. For example, if there was no flare and I applied 3 exposure, +3 exposure on her, then it wouldn't be as bright as if that flare was in the shot. So right now when I go to zoom in on the eye, okay. I'm gonna hit K again. I'm gonna go to a preset that I made called eyes, and all it's doing is on the side there. You can see exactly what it's doing on the side there. I'm gonna go ahead and just paint it over the eye. And I already know that because that flare is there, it's making everything very drastic. So usually when I would paint the eye with this preset, it wouldn't go this level. So what I'm gonna do right now is just change the exposure level over here to maybe like something like 0.2. I feel like that's still too much, so I'm gonna go to 0.1. and it's gonna be fine. So sometimes what I do is I'll apply that effect. If you hover over that effect where that little circle is, then it'll highlight in red what you painted on there. So that's what's going on right now. But I'm gonna go ahead and just delete that effect and then hit Control Z so you guys can see exactly what it did. So I feel like it's good there. I'm gonna go ahead and zoom out. I'm gonna hit backspace, and what that's gonna do is show you the before and after so far. And that's gonna be the before, and this is gonna be what I did so far to the image right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and now export this image and work on it in Photoshop. I know that you guys were probably wondering about the export settings, so I'm gonna go ahead and just show you that as well. What I always export as when it terms of like the full resolution where I really wanna work on that image, I'll go on full resolution. I think that's a preset that I made, but let me just go and slide down so you guys can see exactly everything. I don't have any of the image sizing adjustments there. I have it as JPEG, sRGB, quality 100. I sharpen for screen standard, all that stuff you guys can see there. I'm gonna go ahead and export it now and then work on the photo in Photoshop. Okay, so now I'm in Photoshop. I am actually gonna be using an old version of Photoshop called Photoshop CS6 Extended. I've been using this one, I think, since high school, so 2009. So if you have an older version of Photoshop, in other words, you'll be fine. I'm gonna go ahead and open the image. This is the image here. And I'm gonna go ahead and just start editing. It's pretty much exactly how I would if I was not making this video. So first thing I would do is remove any sort of blemishes and distractions. So I'm gonna take a look at the image, see the things that are just distracting me from the marina and just remove them. And I'm gonna go ahead and just show you guys what distracts me right now. So there's this little, I don't know what it is, fly or gnat, that, a little bit of the hairs, and this right here. So those are the main distractions that I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go ahead and remove. So the way that I remove those is I usually use the patch tool, the spot hiding brush tool, if it's a little spot, or the patch tool. And I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys both of those right now because that patch tool on the bottom is gonna be helpful on that fence because it's similar patterns. I can get rid of all of that little, I don't even know what it is, a glare? Let's go ahead and remove that right now. One thing that you have to make sure is that when you use these tools, the spot hiding brush and the patch tool, you have to make sure that this area on the top here where it says sample all layers, you need to make sure that that's enabled, because if you try to remove something, it's gonna tell you you can't, because effectively why I make an empty layer is because, in other words, if you were to make a copy of that background layer, you're making Photoshop work with two images right there, and it's gonna make your computer work heavier than it needs to be. So making an empty layer and using these tools is gonna be easier on your computer. So let me just show you exactly what I mean. So I'm gonna go ahead and zoom in, go to that bottom where I want to remove that glare. I'm gonna be using the patch tool and I need to click on sample all layers on top. I'm gonna go ahead and just select that area. And then I'm gonna go ahead and see, this is what I mean by it's helpful that it's a repeating pattern, because it's easy to remove that thing that I didn't want there. So yeah, it's already removed and it did a good job. So what I mean earlier where you're making your computer work harder is, let me just show you. I'm gonna go ahead and just take off the background layer and you can see exactly what happened when I added the patch tool there. It made a copy of that background layer and it put it onto the area to kind of mask it away. If I were to work on making another background layer and just do all the edits there, remove all the things I wanted to there, I'd be making a whole other copy of that photo there. And you're just making the computer work harder. I believe there's an area on the, let me see, on the bottom of the screen. Yeah, you can see in the bottom of the screen where it says doc and it says the size of the file. Right now, if I were to make a copy of that background layer, Control J, Command J if you're using a Mac, it'll show you on the bottom the size of the file on the bottom. So you don't want to make your computer work harder than it needs to be. So let me just continue. Now, when I remove that, or when I hide that layer and put it back on, you can see those are the distractions that were really bugging me. During this step, I also try to remove the blemishes on the skin. So before I forget that, let me just remove anything that I might see that I want to remove. Toggle on and off, zoom out. Everything looks good to me now in terms of not just having distractions. And now I'm gonna go ahead and do another major step right now. This major step is gonna involve the levels adjustment layer brush, or what's it called? The levels adjustment layer. That's what I meant to say. When I add this, which I always do in every photo, regardless of natural light or off-camera flash, what happens is that the colors come out nice and rich, but it makes a lot of contrast. So sometimes it'll be good effects in terms of that contrast in color, but sometimes there'll be like a little bit of fringing in terms of the colors on the side or anywhere in the image. So you have to be careful about that. I do like how the image is right now. I feel like it's a little too dark in some areas, but so I'm gonna go ahead and just reduce the opacity to maybe, I don't know, 85%. I do like it there. And I'm gonna go ahead and just leave it now, because the next thing I'm gonna do after this, usually what I do after that is go ahead and start doing the dodge and burn. So I'm gonna go ahead and get a curves adjustment layer, bring it down, or actually bring it up to the next level the level that it started at, the next level above that. Stick to there, hit Control or Command I, and I'm gonna get another one, and that's gonna be the burn, and go to the next level down, hit Control or Command I, and then start to paint the dodge. And I'm gonna go ahead and fast forward to this so it doesn't have to be that long of a video, but basically what I'm gonna do with the dodge and the burn is find areas where the light is already complementing her. In other words, these bright areas here on the shirt, the bright pants, her skin, this area, all this area here, and I might paint again outside of her like I did in Lightroom. So I'm gonna go ahead and that. You guys will see exactly when I just speed up the process, but I just wanted to explain a little bit about what I was doing. Before I forget, I did want to mention the opacity and the flow. Usually when you paint something, an effect on something, it'll paint it very heavily if the flow is at 100%. I usually like to keep it at a lower percentage of the flow so that it gradually builds on, so that it's easier to kind of make the effect more gradual and less apparent. So yeah, just keep in mind, opacity 100%, flow somewhere between 1 to 5%. Okay, so I did a lot of dodge and burn right now. I'm gonna hold Alt, click on the curves adjustment, and that's all the area that I made brighter, all that bright, all that white. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on again, click off of that. Just toggle the effect off and on. That's basically what I did right now. I will probably paint just a little bit of this background over here, but like I mentioned before, is when I first edited this shot, I felt like it would be improved with a crop. So I'm gonna go ahead and maybe add that crop in and just get like a portrait orientation. So now I'm gonna go ahead and do the burn. Okay, so I did a lot of dodge, or actually I did a lot of burn right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and zoom out, toggle the effect off and on. And what I did was add too much. So sometimes I don't mind doing that at all, because what you can easily do is just reduce the opacity of the effect. And I like to kind of just zoom, or not scroll and see exactly what level I'm fine with. And I think maybe around 40% looks good to me. So I'm gonna toggle the effect on and off. And it looks good to me. So I'll leave it there. Again, this is not a heavy effect, but what I did see is that when I was burning, I felt like I could improve a little bit more by using a little bit of dodge in certain areas. So I'm gonna go ahead and just do a little bit more dodging. Oh yeah, and one thing I wanted to mention before I do this is when it comes to dodging and burning from like a wider view like this, if I were to just dodge and burn from this level, that's technically, I don't know if it's technically, but it's what you would consider global dodge and burn. When you zoom in and do stuff very small, it's called local dodge and burn. And the reason why I want to mention that is because there's a little bit of darkness underneath her eyes, and I'm going to go ahead and dodge that area. You'll see right now, and it's going to kind of remove that effect. And that's going to be technically, I believe, local dodge and burn. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just looking to my curves to make sure that I'm painting on the right layer. And I'm going to go ahead and then zoom out in a second to see the effect. Okay, so I'm going to just toggle it off and on. Actually, I can just Control Z. Oh yeah, you can see it gradually building on. I should have added another layer, another curves adjustment layer, so you guys can see exactly what was going on. But the effect is there. What I'm gonna do now is start to mess with the colors. Usually I do that first. I think that's something that I do first before dodge and burn, but I'm gonna go ahead and do it now before I forget. I use the color balance adjustment layer, and again, there's no direct way of how I adjust the colors. I just mess around and see how I like the photo to be. So I'm gonna just play with the sliders a bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and toggle that effect on and off. It's very subtle. It goes from more of a bluer green tinted image to more red and cyan. So I'll leave it there. Now the next thing I'm gonna do is probably frequency separation. I didn't say that right. Frequency separation. I don't like to do this a lot because it's something that can be easily overdone. So I do wanna recommend that if you use it, don't use it too heavily. I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys how to do that manually. So I'm gonna go ahead and get empty layer, hit Control-Alt-Shift-E. That's gonna make a copy of the image. I'm gonna hit that again, Control-Alt-Shift-E. It's gonna make another copy. And I know I mentioned before that's gonna make the image or make Photoshop work harder, but it's gonna be something that's required for this frequency separation. I'm gonna go ahead and hit Shift, hold down Shift and select both of these layers. Hit Control-G, that's gonna make it into a group. And then you can name it and be more organized than I am right now. But I'm gonna go ahead and just deselect the layer 3 so you guys can see that I'm gonna be blurring layer 2, which is the lower part of the step. Blur, Gaussian blur. For this step, you don't wanna have anything that's too much of a blur. So I'm gonna go ahead and maybe put like 3, or maybe 2. And then leave it there. Now that's gonna be blurred, but you're now gonna alter the layer 3 and go to image, go to apply image, make sure that where it says layer, you want it to merge into layer 2, which is that other layer that was blurred. Then make sure that it's right here, exactly how it is on the screen. Subtract, scale to offset 128, click OK, change the blending mode to linear light, and then basically the whole point of frequency separation is that you're separating the image into colors and into texture. So you can adjust both of those a lot more a lot better. In other words, that's a more layman term way of saying it. So let me just zoom into her and see what areas can be improved with a little bit of frequency separation. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit L, which is gonna be the lasso tool. I'm gonna select this area of skin. I do have the feather at 8. It could be, actually should be like around something like 5. So I'm gonna go ahead and just paint that, or draw that again. And then what I'm gonna do is make sure that I have the layer 2, which is the bottom one, the one that was blurred. Make sure that's selected, go to filter, go to blur, go to Gaussian blur, and then you can just adjust it and see how it's gonna make the skin softer. So I have the preview on, but let me just toggle it on. Just pay attention to the skin. It's just making it softer. So 8.4 looks good. Usually I don't go past 10 because usually it starts to get a little bit weird. So that looked good to me. I'm gonna go ahead and select some areas of the skin over here. I'm doing kind of a quick and dirty version of frequency separation for this video, so I will make probably an in-depth version of this this technique. So now I'm gonna hit Control F, which is just gonna apply the last thing that I did, which was that Gaussian burn. But depending on the version of Photoshop that you have, it'll be some other shortcut. So I'm just gonna hit filter on top, and it should show it the effect that you just did right there on top, and you can click it there. So, okay, I feel like it's too much. So usually when I feel like it's too much, then I reduce the opacity. But what I'm gonna do first is just start to do the frequency separation on everything. So, or everything that I would have normally added onto it. And now I'm gonna go ahead and reduce the opacity. I'm gonna zoom out just a little bit, and then maybe just go to somewhere like, maybe like 65. Yeah, 65 looks fine to me. And now I'm gonna just leave it there. Oh, I'm gonna go ahead and just get this other arm first. I'm gonna reduce it just a little bit more, maybe to like 50. Keep it there. And now I'm gonna move on to the next step, which I believe is just to add a little more. One thing that's happening with this photo is that there's a lot of flare still. So usually when I add that levels adjustment layer and apply it to the whole image, I still always see that there's a little bit of less contrast around where that it initially started. So I'm gonna go ahead and just see if that's an issue that I can kind of fix right now. Levels adjustment layer, kind of bring it up a bit, and then just hit Control I, and then paint it over. Ignore that computer noise, and then paint it over. Let me mute my computer. Okay, paint it over. I'm hitting B. I'm using a lot of shortcuts, guys, so sorry if I didn't mention some. Let's see. Paint it over the areas where I feel like it could be improved with a little bit more contrast, which is the areas over here where it started. Okay, so again, I'm using a low flow. So if you're seeing it live, if it's sped up, you probably will see it a lot better. But if you're seeing it as I'm doing it, then it's something you have to train your eyes to see. So let me go ahead and zoom out and just toggle it off and on. So yeah, I feel like it improved the image a lot better by adding that. And now what I'm gonna do is just maybe increase the brightness of the image overall. This is something that's too bright, but I always go brighter and then reduce the opacity. So I feel like 50% at this level right here is good. I feel like it's a good image. But I do want these colors in the background to be a lot more unified and a lot more rich. So I'm gonna go ahead and maybe add selective saturation. Now, after I do this step, one of the last things I should be able to do is just make the colors different. So again, those blues are not something I like. So let me just go ahead and sample some other colors that I'm seeing, like these oranges. And then I hit I for the eyedropper tool, and then hit B for the brush tool. And I'm just gonna paint over these cars and see, actually a little bit of this guy too, and see how it looks like. I'm gonna leave it as is, and then go to blending mode and go to color. And I do like these colors, but obviously I don't want it at this level. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna just change the opacity. So something like maybe 20% and see how that looks like. That looks pretty good to me. One of the last things I usually do to kind of bring the image all together with color is I like to get a solid color adjustment layer. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna hit OK. I'm gonna hide that, and then I'm gonna go back to the color, click on that, and then I'm gonna just sample one of the colors from the background. And I do like these oranges, but not all of them. So maybe this color here. I'm gonna just change the blending mode to maybe screen, and then I'm gonna reduce it. I'm gonna leave it at 7 or 6. You can see this is what it did right now. I'm gonna leave it at this for now, and then I'm gonna add one more levels adjustment layer. It's something I do add a lot of, and then see how this looks like. I'm gonna go ahead and hit Alt, click on that eye on the background layer, and it's gonna show you how the background layer looked by itself, and then I'm gonna click on it again to show you guys the edit. So I do like this image as it is right now, but I'm gonna probably add a crop. So I'm gonna go ahead and save this edit, because I haven't saved it. Marina edit video. I'm gonna go ahead and make sure that it's saved. One risky thing about Photoshop CS6 Extended is that it doesn't save if it crashes, so I took a risk here today. And now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna flatten the image. You guys ask me about sharpness all the time. I added sharpness in Lightroom, and now what I'm gonna do is add a little bit more in Photoshop. So right now, this is at 100%. It could be a little bit sharper, so I'm gonna go ahead and hit Control J. That makes a copy of the layer. Hit Filter, go to Other, and go to High Pass. And somewhere around this level where you're seeing a similar effect that you're seeing on the screen right now is where you wanna be. If you're working on a smaller image, it might be different levels in the pixel area right here, the level, the radius. So yeah, you can adjust it to see more minute, or not fine, I'm using that word, I don't even know what it means. more detail, in other words, in this thing that's in the background here. So I'm gonna hit OK, change the blending mode to linear light. It's gonna make it way too sharp, like gross sharpness. So what I'm gonna do is just change the opacity to maybe 10%, maybe 15% or something lower. Okay, 15% is fine. And then what I'm gonna do is flatten the image again. What I usually would do right now is go ahead and just resize for Facebook, which is gonna be 2048 pixels on the longest edge, but I feel like the image can be way more improved with a crop. What I'm gonna do now is just hit crop. I'm gonna go ahead and just get the Instagram crop resolution or frame, or what's it called? The ratio, that's what I'm gonna say, 4:5. I'm gonna go ahead and just hit this corner, hit shift, and then go up. Okay, that was a weird way of doing that, but I think you could have just, yeah, I could have just rotated it right here. That's what you should do. Ignore what I just did. And I'm gonna go ahead and just see how this image looks like. Usually when I have a portrait in portrait orientation, I try to aim for this this right line here to be on the eye, and it looks pretty good. But so I'm gonna go ahead and just leave it a little bit off and see how this looks like. And I feel like the image is gonna be a lot better with this crop. So what I'm gonna do is leave it here, and then I'm gonna resize. I'm gonna hit Control-Alt-I, and it's gonna change the image dimensions. Change whatever the longest side is, which is gonna be the height in this image, to 2048, and zoom in all the way to 100%. See how you like the sharpness. If it's fine, then leave it as is. If it's not fine, then do that level of sharpening that I did earlier with the overpass, and just add a little bit more sharpening, and then save as is. And that's pretty much it. I think I'm done now. If I forgot anything, which I really don't think I did, I'll let you guys know in the comment section below. But that's pretty much the edit for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, if you guys learned, go ahead and leave a thumbs up on the video. And if you guys want to see more videos, editing videos, let me know as well so I can make them. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Yeah, bye guys.